Welcome to the FPA podcast. I'm your host, Marney Reid, and today we're talking about something every early career orthopedic surgeon and late stage trainee needs to think about, but may not be, and that's insurance. So, we're going to address insurance essentials for orthopedic surgeons, how to protect your hands, your income, and your future. As you all know, orthopedic surgery is incredibly demanding. It's high risk and it can be financially complex, especially for those of you that get involved in various ancillary income streams or start consulting. So protecting that income, protecting your ability to make money for your family and to support them is quite essential. Someone very close to me, an exceptional surgeon at the top of his subspecialty, had his life changed literally in an instant by a tragic accident that left him paralyzed. And that was a very vivid reminder that even the best among us are not invincible. So today we're joined by Larry Keller from Physician Financial Services, an extremely well-regarded insurance advisor for physicians nationwide. Hi, Larry.
Marty, how are you? Great to be here.
Wonderful to have you. And joining us as well is hip and knee surgeon Dr. Eric Dilbone from Charlotte, North Carolina, who will keep this conversation grounded for our surgeon audience. Hey, Eric.
Hey, good morning, Marnie. Thanks a lot for having me on here.
Always a pleasure. All right, let's do this, guys. Before we dive into the technical side, Eric, can you share what you wish you had known about insurance as you transition from residency to fellowship and then into practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something that nobody really tells you or you don't really realize until you've actually experienced it, that the field of orthopedics is a physically demanding job. Every single day you're using your body, and an injury can easily sideline you or quickly take you to where your work is either causing pain or you're not even able to do it. So that's something I didn't even realize of, how physically demanding it is. But, to the insurance piece, that's something that nobody ever talks about during any sort of medical school or residency training. And I was actually very fortunate to have a chief resident during my intern year bring up the topic of disability insurance. And so that kind of the first thing that really piqued into my brain about this topic, something that literally had never come up before. And to what you mentioned about how you think that you're invincible, you're young, healthy, nothing could ever go wrong, but then, you never plan for accidents. So, getting good protection and making sure that your career is protected is something that you don't really think about until after the fact. So having some good advanced planning can be beneficial.
Larry, you work with a lot of physicians, especially surgeons. If your own child were an orthopedic surgeon just starting out, what insurance protections would you insist they have in place?
First and foremost, I agree with Eric. It would really be disability insurance. And if you think about it, physicians are highly trained, not only academically, but you throw in someone like a surgeon where they're also relying heavily on their physical skills for their ability to do their job. So we're all working. Ideally, we all love what we do and we're excited when we get up in the morning and we want to contribute positively to society. But at the end of the day, we're really highly educated, money-making machines. And ultimately, our ability to work and earn an income, unless we have other sources, is what drives everything for our family, right? It allows us to pay down debt, accumulate wealth, and accomplish what it is that we want financially. And even the best of financial plans, no matter how well crafted, if we lose the ability to work and we can no longer put money into our financial plan, that can come to a screeching halt.
Eric, thoughts or reactions to this insight and what you've seen from mentors and peers do? I mean, that was incredible that you had a chief resident that brought it up.
I wish that I would have gone to residency mentors right off the bat. I honestly just took this chief resident's advice and went with the person that he had used. Now, I kind of wish that I had shopped around a little bit because not all insurance is created equally. And you got to make sure that the person who is getting you set up with your insurance is, has your best interests in mind here, especially as a surgeon. I know we'll probably dive into this, but it was overwhelming the number of different options in terms of policies, what they cost in terms of premiums. So I wish I would have leaned in on mentors earlier on because I have changed my insurance over time. However, I think that at least getting the conversation started is what helped me, prepare myself and be prepared to protect myself going forward.
Can you walk us through, if you don't mind, what you started with and how and why and when you started changing? And Larry, I'd love you to, share your input in this.
So there are a lot of different options presented to me in terms of how long do you want to be covered for? If you get disabled from work, do you want to be covered until you're 70? Do you want to be covered until you're 80? There are a lot of different options in terms of how long you would be getting payments. Other things that were being thrown around, there were a lot of different terms, acronyms, COLAs, own occupation, lots of different terms that I had no familiarity with. So I just trusted the person that I went with initially. However, I came to later find out he does sell insurance, but also he's a private wealth manager and was more interested in managing our funds, any sort of retirement funds I had, even though those were minimal during residency. But there was almost an ulterior motive. So yes, insurance was an option, but it was really more about something else. So once I was able to then go to my mentors and find out, who do you go to for your disability insurance and who would you trust in these kind of situations? That's when I got steered in the right direction and was able to get me set up with a policy that was actually going to be protecting me for the work I was doing, not just saying that I was being covered to be a doctor.
I will say residents are busy. Surgical residents and early career physicians are extremely busy. And doing something, no matter how potentially bad the product might be, is better than nothing. That being said, this is a time to learn. And when you're dealing with a financial advisor or an insurance agent, and anybody can call themselves a financial advisor, and they may or may not have the licensing or credentials that actually go along with that, or certifications that go along with that. But this is the time to ask your questions. And like we say at FPA, you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be actively involved. And I will tell you, from the sales side of things, someone might call me and they say, "Hi, I just worked with my friend so-and-so. They said you're really good at what you do and I need to get disability insurance. Just give me what my friend got." And you would think, from a sales standpoint, that would be music to my ears. And there is nothing worse than when I hear that, because it essentially means you're going to buy something quickly to protect yourself, but you don't know or really care what it is that you're buying. And your friend's individual needs, goals, budget, and philosophy might be very different than what it is that your individual needs, goals, and philosophy are. So a little time up front will save you a lot of aggravation and time on the back end. Unlike medicine, where we know you go to medical school, you probably have your career plan set out pretty early. You know what you need to do to accomplish that. You'll do your residency. In a lot of cases, you're going to do at least one fellowship. And we know that you're going to become board eligible and ultimately board certified, and maybe even certified in a subspecialty like hand and upper extremity surgery or sports medicine. I wish I could say the insurance industry and financial planning industry had that same bar. We really don't. So as a result, you don't necessarily know who you're dealing with. So you have to do a little bit of homework. You might want to ask some questions, of which I can give you some of those later. Find out how long someone's been in the industry. How many clients do they have? To Eric's point, like, how do you earn your compensation? Are you an insurance agent and you specialize in a certain type of insurance? Or are you an insurance agent that also is doing financial planning and you're trying to do all different things for, your client base? That becomes very telling.
Can you walk through some of the gaps based on, and we'll stick with orthopedics and spine for now, based on the subspecialties?
Yeah, I mean, we know orthopedics, almost regardless of the subspecialty, are among the highest, earning medical specialties. So one thing that I see happen is the person will buy disability insurance at some point during their training or till the end of their training. They're really getting more involved and looking for it, and they'll purchase it. Maybe they'll increase their coverage when they start their, first quote unquote, real job. And then they'll forget about it entirely. And they will not increase their coverage, even though their income has gone up by multiples. That certainly becomes a gap, is just they're underinsured relative to their rapidly changing income. Another one is relying on employer provided or employer sponsored long-term disability coverage. And I'm always amazed by this one. The typical gut reaction from a surgeon is, I'm covered, I have it at work, my employer provides this. But some serious gaps here is it only protects a percentage of your income. It's typically 60%. That's very much the norm. But there's always going to be some kind of a cap or a maximum monthly benefit associated with that, most of which orthopedic surgeons are going to blow away. So let's just use my 60% of salary, and the maximum monthly benefit is $15,000. That protects an income of $300,000. General rule of thumb is if something is employer provided and they're not adding to your taxable income the premium that's being paid by your employer to your taxable income, that benefit becomes taxable. So now we're at not only 60%, which is certainly less than 100, but now we're actually going to be taxed on that. Then you've got a lot of things that might not be covered under that plan, like any kind of overtime that you might have, any type of bonus or production income. But in orthopedic surgery, most of the time, the base salary alone is going to exceed what that long-term disability insurance plan provides. So at the very least, you want to have an individual policy to potentially make up for the taxes that you might lose on the group plan. And then in my example, have your individual policy cover any excess income that you have, in my example, above $300,000. Otherwise, even though you do have an employer-sponsored plan, you might find yourself woefully underinsured by relying on that.
I have another question. Are there varying degrees of coverage? For instance, let's pretend I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I have to stand and operate with my hands. I don't have, there are some subspecialties where you can actually sit while you operate. That's amazing. Most aren't. Do certain insurance coverages, let's say that I, have, debilitating foot pain and I can no longer stand to operate, but my hands are fine. Are there specific coverages and language within coverages where insurance companies could try to not pay you because they said, but your hands are fine? And you said, yes, but I still have to stand and I cannot do that.
It's not really. I mean, what you'll find is the individual policies are all going to have a definition of disability, as do group policies. And in the individual world, you're usually going to see language to the effect of, well, Marnie, we'll pay you benefits if you're unable to perform the material and substantial duties of your occupation. And of course, an orthopedic surgeon is like, really? What is even a material and substantial duty? Like, you're not even speaking my language anymore. And it's really, well, what is it that you do day in and day out, where if an accident or a sickness prevented you from doing those things, we could not take that out of your job description and allow you to continue doing what you were doing. So we look at not board certification, we look at your actual job duties. And orthopedic surgeons are smart people. If you ask them, hey, what do I do for a living? They're usually going to say, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Maybe they'll go on and say, I'm an orthopedic spine surgeon or I'm a foot and ankle surgeon. But then we have to drill down. We say, well, that's kind of your board certification or your job title. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about what it is that you do? So you wake up, you roll out of bed, let's say you throw your scrubs on, what happens next? And really, that what happens next is their day-to-day. And if someone says, well, I'm an orthopedic spine surgeon and I'm on my feet, 8-10 hours or more per case, and I have debilitating disease, I can no longer stand. Well, that is the material and substantial duty, of an orthopedic spine surgeon. So the fact that their hands are fine, but they can no longer perform their job duties as they were performing them before, that's certainly going to impact their definition of total disability. And if that was what they were doing and they could no longer do that, they would likely be deemed totally disabled. Now, where it gets more complicated is if you've got multiple job duties or you've got multiple jobs. So let's say you're an academic surgeon and you might be an academic spine surgeon, but you also happen to be the chairperson of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery. And yes, you are seeing patients and you've got your own practice and you're operating, but you're also teaching residents. Maybe you're lecturing for pharmaceutical companies. Maybe you've got, consulting business on the side where you're doing medical legal work, and you've got administrative duties. And now you come in and you're like, hey, Larry, I just want to let you know I need to file a claim. I can no longer operate, but I can still do my other job duties. And we're like, well, Marty, let's talk about this. Tell me a little bit more about, what is your day-to-day and where does your income come from? And this becomes potentially very problematic for your multiple job physician or multiple job duty physician, because they're looking at it as, I can't operate. I have an own occupation policy. I can't operate. I'm going to get my full disability insurance benefit. And then you've got where the claims examiner comes in and we're looking at your job duties and we're like, well, Marnie, we see that you do an awful lot of things and you're deriving income from a large number of sources. So let's say your policy is own occupation, and let's just make it easy. Let's say you've got 3 different jobs. You're doing medical legal work, you're doing administrative duties and consulting, and you operate, and you could no longer operate. We would probably come back and say, well, you have 3 jobs. You can't do one, which is that of an orthopedic surgeon. You can't operate. Where is the rest of your income coming from? And you might be deemed partially disabled. Well, Guardian, just one of the companies that has own occupation coverage, several years ago, they introduced something that's called the enhanced medical specialty definition. And it's not the base policy definition. It's really a fallback type definition for a situation like this. And essentially we say, well, Marty, look, you have these 3 different jobs. Let's just take a step back before we call you partially disabled and pay you benefits based on loss of income. Prior to your disability, was more than half of your income derived from performing invasive or surgical procedures? And if your answer is, well, yes, more than 50% of my income was derived from performing invasive or surgical procedures, they will actually deem you totally disabled. Even if you remain working for the same academic institution and now you're ramping up your side jobs because you can no longer operate and you have more time, you would still receive your full disability insurance benefit plus what you continue to earn doing those other jobs or other job duties. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And Larry, that's a great point that you're bringing up about the multiple jobs. That's something that, as a new in practice surgeon, never even crossed my mind. Nobody walks into their first job with consulting agreements and things like that. So having that knowledge that as you build those things throughout your career, you need to make sure that you're covered. So that's a great point there.
One other big thing that I see, and the hospitals and private practices have all learned, post-COVID, that we value our physicians. We value the income that our surgeons generate for us and the hospital. But we're terrified of giving big salaries in the event something happens. So what a lot of private practices and institutions have done, and you probably can attest to this, is the salaries are good, but the real money that's up for grabs is all tied to productivity, right? RVUs and WRVUs. And if you're productive, that's great for you. It's great for the hospital. Everybody's making money. Everybody's happy. The problem is if someone becomes disabled, and let's say they're out of work for 6 months, a year, or longer, and they recover and they go back to their practice, you will probably find a lot of your patients have left you. A lot of the referrals that you used to get from your patients to friends and family members, they're not coming in at the same rate that they used to. Other healthcare professionals that used to refer to you, they're like, Eric's great. He's got the Midas touch, but I don't know where this guy has been for the last X number of months or years. So you go back, you look great. You're probably more well-rested than you've been in a decade, but your practice is just not nearly as busy as it used to be, and your production is suffering. And because a large percentage of your income is tied towards productivity, even though you have physically recovered, financially you have not. So one area to be very cognizant of with these disability policies is built into what they call the partial disability benefit in most cases. And this is what's known as a recovery benefit. And this is where I go back. My doctor has really discharged me from care. I can do everything I used to do, same number of hours or more. There's no restrictions on me whatsoever. I still have a loss of income it's really due to my prior disability. And lo and behold, some policies limit the time period that they will pay you, even though you still have that loss of income. And one of them that I'm thinking of, it caps out, after 12 months. So imagine, you went down at the top of your game, you're busy as could possibly be. Now you're disabled, you return, and your practice and productivity have basically been decimated. And at the end of 12 months, they're like, Eric, it's been great protecting your income, but because you're now back and you can do everything you used to do for the same number of hours or more, and you still have a loss of income that was due to your prior disability in which we paid you benefits, we limit that to 12 months and we're done here. I mean, that is shattering to someone when they find out that their money is going to end, but their disability, at least financially, has not ended.
Larry, that's a great point you make about subspecialization, even within the insurance world. And that really very much parallels the trend that you see in medicine nowadays, especially in orthopedics. If I were to tear my rotator cuff, I would probably want someone who subspecializes in shoulders to be operating on me. So if I'm out there shopping for insurance as an orthopedic surgeon, I probably want someone selling me insurance that knows something about what an orthopedic surgeon does and what sort of insurance products would be good for an orthopedic surgeon, as opposed to just a general insurance salesperson.
Thank you both for sharing such practical and honest insight. For our audience listening in, you don't have to have everything figured out. As we've demonstrated here, you just need the right protections and the right partners. We hope today's conversation gives you a better understanding of how to safeguard your career, family, and potentially your future. If you want to reach out to Larry with questions, please email him at lkeller, L-K-E-L-L-E-R, at physicianfinancialservices.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of the FPA podcast.
This podcast is intended for general public use and is for informational purposes only. The Foundation for Physician Advancement podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Physician Financial Services, and opinions stated are their own. Lawrence B. Keller is a registered representative and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, known as PAS, OSJ 777 3rd Avenue, Suite 1703, New York, New York, 10017, at 212-541-8800. Securities products and advisory services are offered through PAS, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representative, the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Physician Financial Services is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. AR Insurance License number 1057229, California Insurance License number OC 37340. Jerry code expires March 28.